If you haven't subscribed yet, now's the time. When the channel reaches 1,000 subscribers, I'll share a surprise story I've prepared especially for you. The wind had been running through the town since noon, carrying dust from the dry gulch and scraping it against every wall and shutter that still stood. By the time the sun dropped low, the main street looked like something forgotten, a place where even the horses tied to the rail seemed unsure if they should stay. The sign that read Sheriff's Office swung weakly on one chain, the paint worn thin. Sheriff Calder Hayes sat on the porch, his chair angled toward the empty street. The brim of his hat shaded his eyes, though the day's light had already dulled to the color of clay. He had been sheriff once in name and law, but that was before the town thinned out, before the last deputy left, before people stopped calling him by title and started saying only Calder. His badge was still pinned to his vest, but its shine had dulled, and it served more as a memory than authority. He'd been in this town for 5 years, since the war ended, and he'd quit the army patrols that pushed west through Apache land. Back then, he believed he was bringing order. Now he mostly tried to make peace with what that meant. His life had narrowed to coffee, fence work, and long silences. The evening air smelled of iron and old smoke when he saw movement beyond the feed store. 4 figures walking slow, steady, and close together. At first, he thought it was a family passing through, but then he noticed they had no wagon, no horses, and their steps were uneven. The smallest stumbled once. They came down the street without a word, and no one else came out to look. The saloon door cracked open just enough for 2 men to stare before closing again. When the 4 reached his porch, they stopped. Their faces were streaked with dust, their clothes torn and sun-bleached. One of them, older than the others, maybe in her early 30s, stepped forward. She had dark hair pulled into a braid, a small shell on a cord around her neck, and the kind of stillness that came from holding too much pain too long. She looked up at him and said, in careful English, "We come from the North Canyon. Our people gone. Men took them. We no place to go." Her voice was flat, not pleading, not angry, just worn. Calder didn't move at first. His eyes flicked to the other 3. One young woman with a limp, another carrying a small bundle wrapped in cloth, and the smallest, a girl, maybe 16, holding onto the sleeve of the older one's shirt like it was the only thing keeping her upright. He stood up slow, the chair creaking under his weight, and set his cup on the rail. His knees hurt from old rides, and his hands were cracked from work, but what hit him harder than the ache was recognition. He'd seen this before, people coming out of the canyons after soldiers swept through, after raids gone wrong. Sometimes it was his unit that did the sweeping. He cleared his throat. "Name?" The woman hesitated before answering. "Nayla." He nodded. "You got family here?" She shook her head. "No, all gone." He looked down the street again. Nobody was coming. The saloon had gone quiet. The lamps were lit behind curtains. No help was coming from anyone else. He took a breath and said, "There's an old line shack up by the creek. Roof's still solid. I'll take you there." One of the younger women whispered something to Nayla in Apache. She nodded back, calm but firm, then looked to him again. "We follow." Calder went around to the stable and saddled his mare, a gray called Daisy, and brought out the county gelding that hadn't been ridden in months. He handed the reins to the women without saying much. It was easier to do something than to think about it too long. When they started down the road, the town watched from behind doors. No one spoke up, no one offered anything. He felt the weight of their silence, not judgment, just indifference, the kind that stung worse. The road out of town turned to hard dirt, and the sound of their boots and hooves mixed with the wind. Calder led them north, past the dry creek bed and the cottonwoods that still held a little green. He walked instead of riding, letting the mare follow behind. He didn't want to sit above them. It felt wrong. After an hour, they reached the shack. It leaned against a small rise, half swallowed by brush, but it was still standing. The roof was patched with tin. There was a stove, a cot, and a barrel beside the porch that still caught rain when it fell. Calder pushed the door open. The smell inside was old, wood, ash, and dust, but it was shelter. He told them they could stay, that he'd bring food in the morning, and that no one came this way much. They stepped inside, hesitant, moving as if afraid the place might vanish if they entered too quickly. He lit a small fire in the stove, the orange light cutting through the dark corners, and pulled a tin of beans from his saddlebag. He split what he had, watched them eat, then poured them water from his canteen. Nayla ate slow, eyes never leaving him, studying his movements. When the girl fell asleep sitting against the wall, Nayla looked at him and said, "Why you help us?" He didn't answer right away. The truth that he'd spent years hurting people like her in the name of law wasn't something he could say out loud. So he said, "Because no one else will." She nodded, not satisfied, not angry, just understanding the kind of truth that doesn't need to be clean to be real. Before leaving, he told them to keep the fire low and the door barred. He would return at first light. Outside, the night air hit him cold, and he stopped on the porch, listening. The only sound was the creek moving over rock. He sat down, rifle across his knees, and stared out at the darkness. He thought about the faces of the women, about how many times he'd seen that same look before, fear buried under exhaustion. He felt the familiar pull of guilt, heavy in his chest, but beneath it was something quieter. Not redemption, not yet, just the first small sense that maybe this was something he could still do right. He stayed awake all night, listening for hoofbeats, until the light began to gray the hills. When the women stepped out in the morning, they found him still sitting there, the rifle resting against his leg, his eyes open and tired but steady. For the first time in a long while, Calder Hayes had someone to protect, and that meant he had a reason to stay. The next morning broke with a thin fog rising from the creek, turning the air cold enough to sting the lungs. Calder stood by the porch, his coat collar pulled up, watching the first smoke rise from the stove inside. The smell of burned wood mixed with something new, warm water and boiled grain. It meant the women were awake, and that the place, for the first time in years, was alive with more than wind and silence. He stepped inside. The shack looked different already. The women had cleared the dust from the corners, hung their blankets against the cracks in the wall, and swept the floor with a pine branch tied with cord. The smallest, Loma, knelt near the stove, stirring a small pot with both hands wrapped around the handle like it was a precious thing. Nayla stood near the window, her braid tied with a piece of rawhide, watching the creek outside. Calder took off his hat. "You all right for the night?" Nayla nodded once. "Yes. No men. No horses. Just wind." He noticed she hadn't slept much, dark circles under her eyes, a faint tremor in her hands. He didn't mention it. "I'll head to town soon. Bring food, blankets, tools. The road's quiet. I'll be back by midday." Nayla hesitated. "You come back." The question caught him. It was simple but sharp, and it told him exactly how little trust people had left in promises. "Yeah," he said. "I'll be back. You have my word." She nodded again, but didn't smile. She turned to Loma and said something in Apache, soft and rhythmic, maybe reassurance. He couldn't understand the words, but the tone carried something steady, something like command mixed with care. Calder left before the sun burned through the fog. The walk to town was long and cold, the road marked by wagon ruts and coyote prints. He tried not to think, but the questions came anyway. Who had taken their tribe? Were those men still out there? Would they come north looking? He reached the general store as the owner, Henry Pike, was unlocking the door. Henry was a broad man, too friendly when it benefited him, too quiet when trouble stirred. Calder asked for flour, salt, beans, 2 blankets, and a spool of wire. Henry raised an eyebrow. "You setting up camp out there again?" "Just fixing the old place," Calder said. Henry leaned on the counter. "You seen anyone come through lately?" "Couple fellas said they were tracking some runaways. Claimed they were taking 'em back south for work." Calder kept his face still. "No, haven't seen anyone." Henry shrugged, tied up the goods, and said, "You hear anything, you let him know I ain't the law out here. I don't want no fight in front of my store." Calder paid and left. His stomach turned as he walked. The men Henry mentioned, those were the ones. He'd seen that kind before, bounty riders with false papers, men who sold captives like cattle. They always rode confident, believing no one cared enough to stop them. He'd been one of those men once, in uniform, chasing shadows for orders he no longer respected. By the time he returned to the shack, the sun was high and the fog had burned off. The women were outside by the creek, washing clothes in the cold water. The smallest one laughed once, a short sound that startled even her. It was the first laughter he'd heard near this place in years. He carried the sacks inside and set them down. "You all stay put a while," he said. "Town's asking questions." Nayla came to the door, her face alert. "What questions?" "About you. About who's looking for you." She was silent for a long time. Then she said, "They will come." Calder rubbed his chin. "How many?" "3, maybe 4. White men. With horses. Armed." She nodded. "Always." He thought for a moment, his jaw tight. "Then we'll be ready if they do." The words came out before he could think them through. It surprised even him. He hadn't planned to get involved. But something about the way Nayla looked at him made it impossible to say otherwise. She didn't thank him, and he didn't expect her to. There was no need. Over the next few days, they worked quietly. Calder showed them how to fix the window frame with spare wood, how to trap rabbits, how to hang jerky in the shade. He didn't talk much, but he found himself explaining small things, how to find dry wood after rain, how to tell if a cloud meant real weather or just bluff. Nayla listened carefully, her eyes never wasting movement. Sometimes, when he caught her watching him, he wondered what she saw. A man trying to do right? Or the same kind of man who once burned villages for the sake of peace? The thought ate at him more than he wanted to admit. One evening, as the sky turned red over the hills, Nayla sat by the creek washing her hands. Calder came to check the traps and stopped a few steps behind her. He wanted to ask about her tribe, about how far she'd come, about why she hadn't left sooner. But the words felt like knives. So he said only, "You've been through worse than most. You don't owe me stories." She looked at him, her expression unreadable. "You have stories too. You just don't tell them." He met her eyes and saw something, curiosity, maybe pity, maybe understanding. He looked away first. "Some things are better left buried," he said. She stood, wringing water from her hands. "Buried things still come back," she said. Then she walked past him toward the shack. That night, Calder sat on the porch again with his rifle across his knees. The sky was full of quiet stars, the kind that made the desert feel endless. He thought about what she said. Buried things still come back. He knew she was right. Inside, the women had fallen asleep. Through the wall, he heard their breathing, steady, safe. It reminded him of something he'd almost forgotten, that protecting people didn't need words or titles or badges. It just needed someone who stayed. As he leaned back, he noticed tracks by the road, fresh hoof prints, not his. The ground was dry, so they were recent. 3 riders, maybe 4. He studied the pattern, the depth, the direction. They'd passed near the creek and turned south again, maybe scouting. He looked toward the horizon, jaw tight, heartbeat slow but heavy. They were close. Tomorrow, he'd need to be ready. But tonight, as the cold deepened and the last ember in the stove faded, he sat awake, guarding what was left of peace in a world that rarely gave it twice. By the 5th morning, the air had changed. The light came sharper, and the wind carried something that didn't belong, a faint trace of horse sweat and smoke that didn't come from the creekside fire. Calder woke before dawn, uneasy without knowing why. Years of patrols had tuned him to quiet signs, a bird's call cut short, dogs that didn't bark, the air tightening around a sound you couldn't yet hear. He left his bedroll by the wall and stepped outside. The ground was dry, the sky pale gray, the kind that holds back heat until noon. Down by the creek, Nayla was already awake, washing a pot. Her movements were calm, but her eyes were distant, searching the far tree line instead of the water. Calder followed her gaze. Nothing moved, but both of them felt the same thing. Someone had been there. He went to the ridge that looked over the north road. When he reached the top, he knelt and brushed his fingers over the dirt. Fresh tracks, for horses, heavy loads, no wagon wheels. The pattern was clean, too clean for travelers. He felt his chest tighten. These men weren't passing through. They were searching. When he came back to the cabin, Nayla was waiting by the door, arms folded, face hard. "They come?" she asked. "Soon," he said. "You were right." Her jaw clenched, but she didn't show fear. "Then we stay." It wasn't a question, and he didn't argue. "We stay." He began to move fast and quiet, the way he used to before ambushes. He reinforced the latch on the back door, trimmed the brush near the creek so they could see the road from a distance, and set 2 tin alarms with fishing line stretched low across the brush path. Nayla helped without asking what each thing was for. She watched once and learned. Inside, Taya boiled strips of meat to soften them for Loma, whose foot still ached from a cut that hadn't healed right. The girl tried to hide her limp, embarrassed by slowing the others down. Calder noticed and stopped to check it. The skin was swollen, red under the bandage. "Needs rest," he said. Loma shook her head. "I can walk." He crouched beside her. "No one's asking you to fight. Staying alive's enough." She nodded but didn't meet his eyes. He saw something in her expression, not fear but shame. It struck him how all of them, in one way or another, had been taught that survival was a weakness. Around midday, the wind died. That's when he saw them. 4 riders on the far ridge, silhouettes against the sun. Too far for detail, but close enough that dust trailed behind them. Calder stepped back into the shack and reached for his rifle. "They're here," he said. Nayla didn't move. These men, they were bluecoats. He shook his head. No uniforms. Hired guns. Her eyes flicked to the others. "They will not stop." He looked through the narrow gap in the window boards. The riders were coming down the slope slow, cautious now, watching for signs of life. They stopped halfway and split apart. 2 stayed on the ridge, 2 kept coming. One raised a spyglass. Calder turned to the women. "Go to the creek path. Stay low. If you hear shooting, run north, not east. East leads to the canyon." Nayla straightened. "We stay with you." He almost told her no, that it was safer to run, but she said it with such calm certainty that arguing felt foolish. He nodded once. "Then stay quiet. Don't show yourselves until I say." The riders reached the clearing in front of the shack. Calder stepped out onto the porch. His rifle rested against the rail, not raised yet. The men looked rough, dust-caked faces, revolvers at their hips, one with a scar cutting through his beard. The lead rider dismounted and spat into the dirt. "Morning, Sheriff," the man said, voice oily with mock politeness. "Heard there's some folks up here don't belong. Apache runaways. You seen any?" Calder's face didn't move. "Nobody here but me." The man squinted, studying him. "You sure? Ain't like you to keep to yourself. Word in town says you've been buying more supplies than one man needs. Town talks too much." The man smiled, showing yellow teeth. "These people we're looking for, their property. Papers say so." Calder's voice stayed flat. "There's no such thing as property in this county." The man's grin faded. "That a threat?" "No, just the law." A long silence followed. One of the men shifted in his saddle, uneasy. Calder's hand hung loose by the rifle, not yet touching it. The lead man's eyes flicked toward the shack, then back to Calder. "If I search that house and I find them, we're going to have a problem." Calder nodded slowly. "You will." The rider laughed once, but it didn't sound honest. He turned like he was heading back to his horse, then spun fast and reached for his revolver. Calder didn't hesitate. One shot cracked the air, clean, controlled, hitting the dirt an inch from the man's boot. The gun froze halfway out of its holster. "Next one won't miss," Calder said. His voice carried no heat, just fact. The men looked at each other. The scarred one spat again and swung into his saddle. "You're playing a fool's game, Hayes. You can't keep them safe forever." Calder stepped off the porch and stood in the open. "Maybe not, but not today." The riders turned their horses and rode off the way they came. Slow at first, then faster once the road opened. Dust rose and drifted east. Calder stood there until they disappeared. When he turned back, Nayla was standing in the doorway. Her expression was calm, but her eyes were wet. She stepped forward. "They will come again." He nodded. "Then we'll be ready." That night, the fire burned low. The tension that had filled the room all day finally began to ease, but no one truly relaxed. Calder sat by the door, cleaning his rifle, oiling the lever. Nayla sat across from him, stitching a tear in Loma's blanket. The small girl slept, her foot bandaged tight, her breathing steady. After a long silence, Nayla spoke. "Why you do this? Why risk for us?" He kept his eyes on the rifle. "Because I used to be the kind of man who wouldn't." She looked at him for a moment, then back to her sewing. "Then maybe that's why you're still here." Calder didn't answer. He finished the rifle, set it aside, and looked out the window. The creek shimmered under the moonlight, quiet. waiting. He didn't know how long they had before the riders returned. Days, maybe less. But for now, they were alive, and the line between duty and redemption had blurred into something simple. Stay, protect, endure. Outside, the wind picked up again, carrying the smell of dust and rain from far off. The same wind that had once driven him from one command to the next now passed through the shack's broken boards, whispering in the dark. Calder didn't sleep that night. He sat with the rifle in his hands, listening for hoofbeats that didn't come. And for the first time in years, he wasn't thinking about running. He was thinking about holding his ground. The next morning came without rest. Calder hadn't slept. The air was still, the kind of silence that followed tension, not peace. He sat on the porch while the first light crept over the hills. The ground was damp from a night fog, and a thin layer of dew glistened on the grass. His rifle leaned against the wall beside him. He had cleaned it twice out of habit, even though he hadn't fired it since the day before. Inside, he could hear movement, the soft scrape of a chair, the sound of someone stirring ashes in the stove. Nayla stepped out, a blanket around her shoulders. She didn't look at him right away. She watched the trees instead, the same direction the riders had gone. "They won't stop," she said quietly. "No," he answered. "They won't. They'll bring more next time." He nodded. "Probably." She turned then, her eyes steady. "So we should leave." Calder looked out at the creek. The water moved slow, cutting a narrow path through the rocks. He thought of the empty towns farther north, burned homes, forgotten trails, places where law meant nothing. He'd seen enough of them to know that running didn't always mean safety. "If you go," he said finally, "they'll find you before the week's out." "You know that." Nayla's jaw tightened. "Then what do we do?" He met her eyes. "We stay. We make this place hold." She studied him for a long moment, as if weighing whether to believe him. "Why you help us?" Calder Hayes. "You fight against us before. I see it in you." He didn't try to deny it. "Yeah," he said. "I did things I can't fix. But I can do this right." She held his gaze, reading him. Then she nodded once. "Then we stay." It was settled, not with a plan, but with that one short exchange. After that, there was no turning back. They started preparing the same day. Calder rode into town before sunrise, keeping his hat low and his coat buttoned to hide the badge. At the general store, Henry Pike greeted him with a forced grin. "You heard those fellas were back through yesterday?" Henry asked as he bagged coffee beans. "Looked sore about something." Calder kept his tone even. "They won't come to town next time." Henry gave a short laugh, not realizing it wasn't a joke. "Well, I'll tell you what, if you're building an army out there, I prefer not to be on either side of it." Calder left without answering. He stopped by the courthouse next, a single-room building with a crooked flagpole. The clerk, old Tom Byers, was just unlocking the door when Calder stepped up the steps. "Morning, Sheriff," Tom said, though the title carried more memory than meaning now. Calder nodded. "Need a statement signed. Got some men out here trying to take people under false claim. I want it on record." Byers sighed and rubbed his eyes. "You think they'll listen to a paper out here?" "No," Calder said, "but I need it anyway." Tom nodded, signed it, and handed over 2 stamped copies. "Good luck with that." Back at the creek, Nayla and the others were already working. They'd moved their sleeping mats to the corner so they could use the rest of the floor for supplies. Loma was hanging wet hides by the door to dry. Taya was cutting branches into stakes for traps. Isha, who had barely spoken since they arrived, was cleaning one of Calder's old revolvers, her small hands steady and deliberate. He watched her for a moment. "You know how to use that?" She didn't look up. "My father taught me." "Before." He didn't ask before what. "Good," he said. "You may need it." That evening, they ate together outside, beans, hard bread, and coffee. The firelight threw slow-moving shadows across their faces. For a few minutes, it felt almost normal. Loma laughed softly when the mule brayed and tried to chew the porch rail again. Even Nayla smiled, though briefly. After they finished eating, Calder stood and walked toward the ridge. Nayla followed him, quiet. The night was cold, and the moonlight turned the creek silver. From up there, they could see the road leading south, empty for now. "You think they'll come soon?" Nayla asked. "They'll come when they think we're not ready." "And are we ready?" He looked at her. We will be. She studied his face, as if searching for the man he used to be. You were a soldier, yes? Yeah, I was. You follow orders? I did. And now? He exhaled. Now I don't take them. I give them. When they make sense. Nayla didn't respond for a while. Then she said, You still carry the badge. He touched his vest, where the metal lay under the fabric. Habit, I guess. She nodded. You can't save everyone with that. I know, he said quietly. But I can try to save someone without it. The following day passed slow and tense. Every sound made them look up. The creak of trees, the call of crows, the echo of wind. Calder set up a signal fire on the ridge and showed Nayla how to light it fast if trouble came. He also went to the two ranchers nearby, men he'd helped before, fixing their fences when storms hit. He told them what was coming, gave them the names of the riders, and asked them to keep an eye on the south road. Neither asked questions. They simply nodded. By late afternoon, the air turned heavy again. Clouds rolled in from the east, low and gray, promising rain. When it came fast, sharp drops hitting the tin roof in quick rhythm. They stayed inside, the sound of water filling the space where words might have been. As darkness settled, Nayla sat by the window, watching lightning flash over the hills. You think they'll come in storm? She asked. They might, Calder said. Some men like to use the noise. But you wait anyway. I wait, he said. Hours passed. The storm eased. The rain softened to a whisper. Then, faint at first, came the sound of hooves. Not one. Several. Slow. Cautious. Calder stood. He looked at Nayla, who had already reached for the rifle leaning by the door. Their eyes met. No words. Just understanding. He stepped onto the porch and scanned the dark. The riders appeared through the mist. 5 this time, their outlines blurred by rain. One carried a lantern swinging from his saddle. They stopped at the edge of the clearing, silent but certain. The leader, the same man from before, scar and all, raised his voice. You got a choice, Sheriff. Hand them over, and we ride out clean. Refuse, and this place burns with you in it. Calder's heartbeat slowed instead of rising. He felt no panic, only a strange calm. Behind him, he heard the quiet click of a rifle bolt sliding into place. Nayla's voice came low, firm. We don't run. He called back. You ride in here, you'll answer to the law. The man laughed. Law? Ain't no law out here, but men like me. Calder stepped forward, rain dripping from his hat brim. Maybe, but today that changes. For a moment, no one moved. The rain hissed through the trees. The creek ran low and steady, and the tension hung heavy enough to feel in the air. Then the lead man pulled his pistol and fired a warning shot into the sky. Before the echo faded, a bright orange flare rose from the ridge, the signal fire. The ranchers had seen them. The riders froze, glancing toward the light. Calder didn't move. You hear that? He said. That's people coming. You got minutes, maybe less. The scarred man hesitated. He looked back at his men. Their faces shifted, doubt creeping in. He spat, cursed under his breath, and yanked his reins. This ain't over, he shouted. Not by a long shot. Then they turned, galloping south into the darkness. When they were gone, Calder lowered his rifle. Nayla stepped out beside him, the rain now only a mist around them. She exhaled slowly, like someone releasing years of breath at once. You could have killed him, she said. I've done enough killing, he replied. The fire on the ridge burned bright, a beacon against the night. For the first time, Calder didn't see it as a warning. He saw it as a promise that someone, somewhere would still come when called. The rain stopped completely, leaving the smell of wet earth in the air. Nayla turned to him, her expression softer than before. You stay because of guilt? She asked. He thought for a long moment. No, he said finally. I stay because I'm done running. Inside, the women were waiting. Loma smiled faintly when she saw them return. Isha was still holding the revolver, hands steady but tired. Taya stoked the last embers of the fire. The warmth returned, slow and real. Outside, dawn began to climb again, gray and clean. The storm was gone. The danger, for now, had passed. But more than that, something in all of them had shifted from surviving to belonging. And for the first time in many years, Calder Hayes believed the ground under his feet was exactly where he was meant to stand. The next few days passed without riders, without noise, without threat. The silence was different now, no longer tense, but heavy in a gentler way, like the land itself was waiting to see if peace would last. Calder rose before sunrise each morning, checking the ridge, scanning the road that cut through the horizon, but there were no tracks, no movement. The fire scars on the ridge had cooled to gray ash. It was over, at least for now. He came back to the shack one morning and found Nayla by the creek, washing a small bundle of clothes. Loma was beside her, humming under her breath. The sound startled him, a human sound, light and careless, something that hadn't existed here since they arrived. It made the air feel human again. Nayla looked up as he approached. "You look tired," she said. He smiled faintly. "I've been worse." "You watch the hills again?" "Old habit." She nodded, wringing water from his shirt. "You think they gone for good?" He crouched beside her, picking up a wet sleeve and helping her twist it dry. "Men like that don't stop until they find someone else to chase. But they won't come back here. Not after that fire." Nayla studied his face. "You sound sure." "I am." He meant it. He had seen the look in those men's eyes, the mix of greed and fear. They weren't fighters, not when the odds turned. The creek ran clear between them, and for a moment neither spoke. Calder glanced toward the shack, where smoke rose from the stovepipe. "The place looks better," he said. "Yes," she answered. "It feels different now, like it wants to stay." Inside, the changes were clear. The broken window had been replaced with a frame of smooth branches and oiled cloth. The roof no longer leaked. The floor had been swept so many times the boards had turned pale and clean. Loma had hung a small carved figure by the door, a bird, rough but beautiful. Isha had found a tin plate and etched patterns into it with a nail. Taya had filled an old jar with herbs and hung it by the stove. It was no longer just shelter. It was theirs. Later that afternoon, Calder took his badge from his vest and set it on the table. Nayla noticed, but didn't ask why. He looked at it for a long time, the metal dulled and scarred, the letters worn. That badge had once meant authority, then guilt, and now it felt like an anchor he didn't need anymore. He wrapped it in cloth and placed it in the bottom drawer of his desk. When he looked up, Nayla was watching him from the doorway. "You quit being sheriff." "I guess I was never much of one," he said. "But I can still keep order here without it." Her eyes softened. "You already do." In the days that followed, life settled into rhythm. Calder repaired fences along the creek. Nayla and Taya planted a small garden in the silt-rich soil, rows of beans and onions. Isha hunted small game near the ridge, returning with rabbits and quail, her face set with quiet pride. Loma gathered river stones and built a path from the porch to the water. At night, they ate together. Calder noticed how conversation started to flow naturally, short, simple exchanges that filled the quiet without forcing it. Sometimes they laughed. Sometimes they just listened to the creek and the wind. There was comfort in both. Still, there were questions unspoken between them, the kind that lingered since the beginning. One night, while they sat by the fire, Nayla finally asked what had stayed unsaid. "The men who took our tribe," she said quietly. "You knew them? Or men like them?" Calder looked into the fire. "I knew their kind. I used to ride with men like that. The army said we were bringing peace. What we really brought was fear." She didn't speak, and he didn't look at her. The fire popped once, sending sparks up the chimney. "I can't change what's done," he said, "but I can choose what happens here. I owe you that much." When he finally met her eyes, there was no anger in hers, only understanding, the kind that doesn't excuse, but forgives through quiet acknowledgement. "Then we start again," she said simply. That night, for the first time since the day they arrived, Calder slept soundly. No dreams, no noise, just rest. Spring came early that year. Grass grew along the creek, and the wind carried the scent of rain instead of dust. The garden sprouted. The chickens, too gifted by a rancher who'd seen the signal fire, began laying. The days turned warmer, the nights softer. One afternoon, a rider approached from town. Calder stepped out to meet him. It was Henry Pike, the storekeeper, carrying a small crate. He looked nervous but friendly. "Heard the trouble's over," he said. "Figured you might use this." He opened the box to show sugar, coffee, and a small bag of flour. On the house. Calder took it, surprised. You don't owe me anything, Henry. Henry shrugged. Maybe not, but it's good to know somebody's holding the line out here. After Henry left, Nayla came to stand beside Calder. You trust him? She asked. He smiled slightly. Enough to drink his coffee. She laughed quietly. It was the first time he'd heard her laugh like that. Not cautious or weary, but real. That evening, as the sun dropped behind the hills, the shack, their home, glowed in the orange light. Loma was feeding the chickens. Isha was carving something by the door. Teo was humming an old tune while stirring a pot of stew. Nayla stood by the porch rail, watching the creek. Calder joined her, 2 cups of coffee in hand. He passed one to her. Feels like a different world, he said. She nodded. It is. Because we stayed. He looked at her. You ever think of leaving? Starting fresh somewhere else? Her eyes stayed on the horizon. Every day, she said. But then I think, nowhere else has what this place has. People who don't run. They stood in silence for a while. The creek moved slow, the sky fading from orange to violet. Calder took a deep breath, feeling the peace of it settle deep inside him. The guilt he'd carried for years was still there, but it no longer ruled him. It had turned into something smaller, something that reminded him of what mattered. Decency, presence, staying when it would have been easier to leave. As darkness fell, the porch filled with quiet voices and soft laughter. The door stayed open, letting in the night air. Nayla hung her mother's shell necklace on a nail beside it. The fire crackled, steady and warm. Calder looked at the small family before him. People who had come to him as strangers and now stood as something far greater. He didn't say anything. He didn't need to. The wind shifted, carrying the sound of the creek through the open door. He set his hat on the table, leaned back in his chair, and let the stillness settle. The danger was gone. The law was gone. The loneliness was gone. What remained was something real, a home built not for mercy, but from endurance. When the last lantern went out and the stars came alive over the hills, Calder thought only one thing. He had finally found where he was meant to stay. And this time, he would never leave.